Alright, so this is the next video for apes. It's on chapter 16. It's on the kind of the end of the chapter. And we're going to be talking about various things. The first one is about restoring restoring mining areas. We talked a little bit about it with regard to coal mining, and this is a more in-depth coverage of the process of restoring these mined areas. So the goals are first to prevent kind of further damage to these areas. These mined areas are called derelict lands. Let me get my pointer here. Okay, so you don't want, basically if you just left these areas open to erosion and precipitation and everything, they keep becoming degraded and eroding more. So you want to prevent that from happening and essentially put them back together like you did with your cookie lab. And this is also going to help to eliminate basically these as a source of toxins and acidic components that result from all these metals and different minerals reacting with water. And then hopefully the ultimate goal will be to make this land productive for another purpose. So that's kind of the idea behind this. And restoration is also called reclamation. If you remember the Mining and Reclamation Act that we talked about in Chapter 11, this is where this whole thing falls under. So review the 1970 Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, because this is when all of this, all these steps towards restoration were really kind of put into place, and where the law basically made it so that mining companies had to do this. So the traditional steps are you first fill in the land because you are left with a big hole when you mine. Next you need to kind of grade and reshape it. So you don't want to have kind of a bumpy looking landscape, and you want it to look nice and natural, and so a lot of equipment is used to do this. And lastly, you're going to put vegetation there. So your book does a nice job of explaining what happened in Tennessee, the copper basin in Tennessee, and the vegetation you would use would initially be grass. Grass is really kind of versatile and durable. It's going to grow pretty well, pretty fast, and again you're kind of starting at the beginning stages of succession. So that's when you have soil, grasses are kind of the first things to emerge. Alright, so that's the traditional steps. I'm going to go into a couple other ways that you can go about restoring an area, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with mining. Okay, this is a picture showing how essentially a parking lot was transformed into a wetland, and wetlands are really good. If you remember from our chapter on biomes, wetlands are like sponges essentially, so they're going to trap a lot of sediment coming down off of mountains, and a lot of the pollutants if it's a mining area. And by the way, this picture is just because it's a cool picture of showing how a wetland can be created. And how we can really manipulate landscapes. I'm still talking about the use of wetlands with regard to restoring the mining in this case. So they're going to trap the sediment and pollutants before they get into the streams. And bacteria is also going to be used in the wetlands, or the bacteria that lives in the wetlands will break down the toxins that are kind of a byproduct of the mining operation itself. And so this is really important because not only is restoration going to look better than a hole in the ground, but it's biologically and ecologically going to be more healthy because you're helping to break down these toxins, neutralize acids, that sort of thing. Alright, so this is going to improve the water quality downstream because again this wetland is acting like a sponge for kind of trapping these materials as they leave the mining site. And this is expensive to create. This is a lot of work, but eventually, in the long run, it's cost effective. Okay, there's also a technique called phytoremediation, And this is a growing field where plants are used to clean the soil, essentially. They, as you can see, maybe see hopefully in this picture here, these red dots are toxins. This can be metals, it can be pesticides. There are a lot of different kind of chemicals and materials that plants are able to take from the soil and help clean it, but they essentially they will accumulate these toxins in their leaves, and depending on what it is, they'll either break it down if it's something organic like a pesticide, or if it's not, the plants will have to be removed and disposed of because they have metals in their leaves. So essentially there are different types of plants that are going to be able to absorb and accumulate these toxic materials that are in the soil and essentially take them out of the soil, which is really cool. And there's some plants that can absorb quite a high amount of metal, and this is really good because you're taking it out of the soil, and if you remove the plants, you're then removing the toxins. So it's becoming a growing field and technique used to help kind of remedy not only the look of this once derelict land, but also again the kind of biological health and ecological health of it also. And the most successful metals that the metals that have shown the best success with this technique so far are copper, zinc, and nickel, and also organic materials like pesticides have been successful with it too. Alright, so now the next topic is something that you read about and have for homework, which is the distribution versus the consumption of minerals around the world. And this is a big deal because there's a pretty big skew. Highly developed countries, as you know, rely on the mineral deposits quite often in developing countries. And quite often in highly developed countries, they've exhausted their own supplies. For instance, the U.S. and Canada, uses a fourth of all the minerals in the world, but we only have 5% of the population. So as you can imagine, this is going to pose some problems. And also, the governments in developing countries often don't have the money, essentially, to handle all the pollution that is incurred when you mine for all of these minerals. And all the kind of results that we talked about, acid mine drainage, the air and water pollution that results from processing and extracting these minerals. As I was just explaining, it's expensive to fix that, and it's expensive to have controls that minimize that. And so when we being the United States and other developed countries look to developing countries for their minerals, they're essentially encouraging them and to pollute and to kind of degrade their land for their own benefit, for the benefit of the developed countries. So this is a big problem that hopefully we can work to solving in the future. And for an example with chromium, chrome is used in planes and in paint, also with steel. The United States doesn't have any resources of chromium, but we go around the world, and this is a nice picture here, but we basically get it from other places in the world, such as India has a big stock of it, but we are forming our own stockpiles and storing our own, kind of hoarding it because we use so much of it. So it's just important to be aware of this kind of skew that exists. And then the question of, well, so how long are these metals and different minerals going to last? And these two terms that you had in your homework, reserves versus resources. So reserves are kind of what we have, what we know we have, and are currently able to extract profitably. And the resources are potentially what we might have in the future. So if you think of reserves, are kind of, what we have ready to go, and the resources are kind of down the road. And if you look at this table, it's pretty interesting, looking at the life expectancy of different minerals, and if at our current rate of use, how how much longer we'd have them. So this, this isn't very long. It's all less than 100 years. So it really points to this need of reusing a lot of these metals, which we have. I mean, they haven't, well, I guess with spaceships and satellites, some of them gone to space, but for the most part we have the same amount of minerals that we've always had. It's about kind of reusing what we do have. And also, if you're thinking of, some people are starting to think of where on Earth we can still continue to search for them. Antarctica is an option, or at least people are thinking about it. And this, there are many kind of issues that we'd have to deal with if people started to do this. One being that nobody owns Antarctica. So think of, the treaties and negotiations that would be needed to do this are something to think about. And also the logistical issues working in a place like this. And also, the environmental implications that we would have, or that there would be if we did do mining in Antarctica. It's very kind of sparse landscape with few species and very kind of specific and narrow climate conditions. That anyway, so you can think of the many environmental implications of working there. And then also the other kind of resource that we haven't yet exploited is these, and this is an example, there are many more, but these manganese nodules at the bottom of the ocean. And we haven't basically done anything with them yet because it's not profitable to do so. It would be very expensive to get them, but down the road, if we need to, people are thinking maybe we will, but if you think of the logistical issues and environmental implications that would be associated with doing that, getting things from the bottom of the ocean, the environmental implications with it would be something to consider for sure. And then there's also a new technique called biomining, where you essentially use microorganisms to get minerals from ore that has from low-grade ore, so basically from rocks that don't have minerals in very high concentrations, or even sometimes getting minerals from tailings. And so you don't have to mine it. If you think about with a mining lab, it would be like chocolate chips, like spread way out, so you couldn't just take out one big chunk. And the way it works, so 25% of the copper is extracted this way, and the way it works is these low-grade ores, or ores that have low concentrations of minerals, and in copper is bound kind of in this matrix with sulfur, and so that's preventing the copper from being mined effectively. But if you get bacteria that can break down these bonds between the copper and sulfur, the metal will be released. So you can see this kind of caption here. It's an interesting process that might work. And then changing our mineral requirements, basically the idea that we can't be a throwaway society anymore, and kind of reusing what we have. I'm running out of time, but the idea we need to find substitutes, and plastic or glass and other materials. Dematerialization basically means reducing the amount of material that we use. Soda cans used to be very heavy and thick with aluminum, and now they're very thin, so it's a way of using less material for the same thing. And then reusing, using items over and over, which is better than recycling because you don't have to invest the energy to recycle it. And reducing, basically reducing the need, or reducing the products that you use, and that's going to also reduce the need for mining and stuff. And this last example here is how industries can also do that. So they can convert waste into useful materials, so like scrap metal being melted down and used for making new products. And so instead of kind of throwing everything away, you actually take your products and reuse them as secondary materials. Alright, that is it. I'm going to stop because I'm almost up to my 15-minute limit.